I bought one. I thought, this is a really neat car, and this is something that I could use. I was living in Manhattan, liked a little bit of utility, because after all, Manhattan, the rough roads of Manhattan, you need some utility. And it was something that I kept less time than any car I've ever owned in my life. Welcome to our exhibition, JDM and Beyond, the worldwide influence of Japanese automobiles. Except in this segment, we're not actually talking about automobiles, we're talking about trucks. And to join me is one of my favorite truck owners, Mr. Steve Marsoci. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Donald.
And this is very interesting. We have really looked at the influence of Japanese manufacturers and how they add technology and development to serve their customer and sometimes find new market niches. Here is something slightly different. We've got here a Toyota FJ43 Land Cruiser and a Mitsubishi Pajero Evolution. And you know how it's terrific to talk about the fact that many Japanese manufacturers began their manufacturing career by building cars that were either heavily influenced by or licensed from other manufacturers, many of them being British. In fact, the first Datsuns were very similar to Austin 7s. Right. And of course, you cannot look at a Land Cruiser without thinking of a Land Rover, although of course the influences that bore fruit to the Land Cruiser were actually more American, because the first trucks that Toyota built were actually based on a Jeep. And in fact, they used to call them Jeep Land Cruisers until American Motors took exception and said, we don't think you should do that. So they just started calling them Land Cruisers. And it's very interesting because the whole idea of a utility vehicle that could also be used by a family or an individual who didn't want to necessarily use it only off-road, but needed and wanted that off-road capability, was very strong. Obviously, with the Jeep, the development of the Jeep through the many manufacturers that owned the brand, and Land Rover, of course, and their great success, spawned a lot of, I won't say copycats, but a lot of companies that said, this is a big market, we want a part of this. And Toyota is probably more successful than any of the others that followed in that path, after, of course, Jeep. And the Land Cruiser is literally a vehicle which is known all over the world, throughout Africa, Asia, Europe, incredibly durable, popular, long-lasting. And here in the US, they've had quite the revival as a desired collector's item. Things that were once utility vehicles all of a sudden became very sought-after fashion icons. Mm-hmm. And there are companies devoted just to rebuilding them and upgrading them and sort of making them almost resto mods so that you'd have the look of a Land Cruiser with modern technology and performance. This example is a stock car with 125 horsepower. It's a long wheelbase model. It's a soft top, which really gives you that whole idea of a vehicle designed to be used outdoors and to take you on camping trips and things like that. And it's also quite interesting that vehicles like this, in this shape, really show what they were designed to do and designed to be. And that really speaks to me in a very, very powerful way. And I think that for many people that come to the exhibition, they probably haven't seen a Land Cruiser that looks like this, because they've seen mostly the ones that are all sort of tarted up, and a very, very different thing than this. But now you use a truck during the winter as a very practical thing. You have your truck because you carry equipment around, you want to be sure and sure-footed in weather. Exactly.
These videos would not get done.
Thank you very much, exactly. Thank you very much. And so, in terms of looking for something, in terms of practical use for a truck, what is it that you look for?
I mean, I needed a bed. But I mean, if I was anywhere else, I would have something like this. It's a gorgeous truck to begin with, and plenty of utility. Extremely reliable as well.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's very interesting, that the way we use trucks has changed so much, certainly from my youth, where trucks were literally bought by people who only carried things and had to use them for work or for actual off-road utility. And now people use them as an alternative to a car, which is something that, again, a vehicle like this Land Cruiser is not designed to do. And in fact, Toyota recognized that because the Land Cruiser line includes station wagons as well, which developed into the big SUVs in the Toyota line today. So even when they looked ahead, they were marketing these station wagon versions of the Land Cruiser back in the 1960s, and their only competition were the Jeep Wagoneers. So it's very interesting to see how practical use actually had a market application, and that these vehicles were incredibly popular in the US before Toyota was selling a lot of cars in numbers. They were selling a lot of Land Cruisers in places like California, Texas, Alaska, things like that. Now, the other truck we have here is, as they say in Monty Python, something completely different. Tell us a little bit about the Mitsubishi Pajero Evolution.
I'm not going to pronounce it properly. I'm going to say it the American way. The Pajero Evo was the complete opposite of utility. It was purpose-built for racing. It's a homologation vehicle, just under 2,700 made, and it was made to compete in the Paris-Dakar Rally. And it was proven successful as it's won 12 times, several consecutive wins in 97 and 98. With this model, they won first, second, and third 2 years in a row. So it's definitely shown what it's capable of. And you mentioned other manufacturers that we have to thank for that car. We have Peugeot to thank for this, because originally the Pajero was successful in Paris-Dakar in '83. They brought 4, but they ended up losing to Peugeot in the 90s, and they decided, all right, we need to relook at this body that we have, we need to relook at the chassis, and we need to make something that can beat what Peugeot has. And this is what they gave us, an all-out race car.
And it's extraordinary because you look at it, oh, it looks like a miniature truck, like one of the US market Monteros. But underneath this is independent suspension, multi-link rear suspension,
dual wishbone front,
2 torsion differentials.
Yep.
I mean, this is as sophisticated a piece of racing rally kit that you can ever imagine. And we had a conversation before we started filming about my experience with a Mitsubishi Montero. When they were first introduced to the US, I bought one. I thought, this is a really neat car, and this is something that I could use. I was living in Manhattan, liked a little bit of utility, because after all, Manhattan, the rough roads of Manhattan, you need some utility. And it was something that I kept less time than any car I've ever owned in my life. I kept it for 3 months. And the reason why I thought it was really neat, it had an altimeter on the dashboard, which is great, so you can tell what altitude you're at. It also had an inclinometer, so that you could tell, your angle of attack and your angle of depart. Absolutely great. But they also thought it'd be a really neat idea to put a suspended driver's seat in, like you find in an 18-wheel big rig. The idea was interesting, but to have a suspended seat in a vehicle with a very short wheelbase and a very soft suspension, literally you could not drive the car after you'd had something to eat because you thought you were in the middle of the sea. It was quite something. So I traded in on a new 87 Alfa Romeo Milano, something very different indeed.
More fitting for you as well.
Well, but I have to say that obviously shortly after that, Mitsubishi really did a lot to develop the Montero. They came with the 4-door version, the longer wheelbase. It became a totally different vehicle. And it was that development, again, it's something very typically that we see with Japanese manufacturers. They put something out on the road, they put something out on the competition field, and they say, okay, this works, this doesn't work. Let's pivot, let's change, let's develop. And this is probably the ultimate example of that.
Oh, absolutely. It was pure homologation. That's all they wanted. They were tired of losing to Peugeot, and they said, how do we win? And they built something and gave it to the people because that's what they needed to do to get it in the race.
And this is an example of a vehicle as well that probably most people watching this network have never seen in real life. And to see one up close is also quite amazing because it's got a really sort of mean, almost sort of Star Wars look to it, but it's all practical. It's all usable. It's not about design, it's about function.
Exactly.
And when great function becomes really interesting design, I really like that.
I agree. I'm with you 100%.
Well, thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Don.
We look forward to welcoming you back into our gallery here at the Audrain Automobile Museum for our next exhibition highlights video, where we'll go back to the car side, but we'll stay in the competition mode Watch out.